I'm going to try and share my screen. Full disclosure, I haven't tried using one single screen off my laptop in quite a while, so I'll do my best here to make sure you guys can see everything. And bear with me a second, my computer's a little slow here.
I am trying to get it, Jonathan. I'll be right out of here. Hold on a second.
Yep.
Okay. There you go. Can everybody see that?
Can you guys see that okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep, we're set.
Okay, awesome. Should have gone to full
perfect.
screen. Do you guys still see my little window for Teams on there, or can you just see the full slide?
All I see is the slide, Jonathan.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So, okay, yeah, thank you for bearing with me there. Like I said, it's been a while since I worked off just my laptop and not had a couple screens. So, as Bill said, here to discuss continuity of operations for community organizations. And just as Bill stated, I think it's super imperative that people understand, we tend to get caught up in being responsible for working with our constituents and the people that we serve in the communities. But it's just important that we do a little self-help and make sure ahead of time that we're going to be able to continue to function as an organization, especially at the community level, because we're so integral in helping those folks that we want to make sure that we have our bases covered. And so this is not a new concept whatsoever, but ever since COVID happened, continuity of operations is a really big a topic of discussion. Sorry, I just shut my camera off so you guys can see the screen a little better. But it's been an emerging topic, kind of, I'll say, before COVID happened, but really after COVID occurred, it was really a game changer, especially if you think the amount that we used Zoom and Teams before COVID. Certainly not nearly to the level that we do now. And so it's really changed a little bit of the perspective, I guess I'd call it, that we think about from continuity planning. And I'll get into the details in a few minutes, but really wanted to open up with today that continuity of operations planning can be very dense and has a lot of detailed information in it. So what I've tried to do today is just present some of the overarching topics that are really important as part of that planning process. Just to provide some contextual knowledge, and then use this as like a platform, as a foundation to work off of. And as part of this program, as you'll see in a minute, I've included some resources as well, so you can dig a little bit deeper. But I will offer, as Bill said, I do have quite a bit of experience with continuity planning, so I'm always here as a resource for you as well. So don't ever hesitate to reach out to myself or MEMA proper, if you will, for us to give you a hand in continuity planning. So with that, few of the things we'll talk about today, what actually is continuity of operations and why is it important, but also some of the details that I spoke of. What are some of the planning elements? What are essential functions, which is a key term that you'll learn here in just a minute as part of continuity planning. And then what are the 4 phases of continuity? And then we'll wrap up the discussion with some resources that I mentioned before, and then obviously a little time for some open discussion. So, what is continuity of operations? And you'll hear the term COOP thrown around a lot, and that's all that COOP means, is continuity of operations. And it's an effort, like you see there, for individual organizations to ensure that they're able to continue those essential functions when there's a disruption of normal operations. And so we want to think of that as building resiliency and capacity to absorb an impact at the organizational level. And to accomplish this, we want to develop a continuity plan. And as with most plans, especially, many of you guys are involved in these processes as well, we try to build scalable and flexible plans. Continuity planning is no different. We want to remain nimble and be able to adjust our plan accordingly to the situational needs. And what that means is really thinking about different considerations that we have for what may happen. So from a planner's perspective, and especially in COOP, and that's why I really like it so much, is that this is like the king of what if planning. What if this happens, or what if that happens? How's it going to impact our organization, and how are we going to be able to continue to function as an organization and serve our constituents, whatever level that's at, despite facing adversity in the face of an event. And so there's several different ways we can do that, and that's what we'll be discussing today. So what is continuity planning? Simply thinking about how are we going to continue those, what we call essential functions, and I'll define those in a couple minutes here, regardless of what's happening. So what I always tell people in simple terms, continuity planning is thinking about facilitating the continuation of what we do as an organization, no matter what happens. We want to consider a few different things. Obviously, we need our staff. Our staff is one of our most important assets that we have, especially at the community organizational level. But what else are we going to need in these situations to continue doing our jobs, if you will? You know, what kind of stuff do we need? You know, when I say stuff, think about things like equipment or access to maybe documents, what we call essential records, or maybe it's some kind of platform you need. Maybe it's like Teams or Zoom. Maybe it's some kind of, web-based platform. Like we use several here at the agency where, you know, as long as I have access to the internet, I have access to that platform. But also one thing you want to consider, and this is what really changed a lot during COVID, was location. And we'll get into talking about a few different locations here in a few minutes, but really prior to COVID, the working assumption and continuity planning is that when something happened, like say for us here at our office in Augusta, if something happened here, we needed to have a plan in place to pick up and move our shops somewhere else, you know, some other physical space. But what we learned through COVID is that with the advent of these new platforms like Teams and Zoom and the different capabilities that we have now, it may be just as easy to transition to what we normally used to call telework or remote work. So it just increased our capacity to provide what we call mitigation measures to whatever we're facing. So whether it be being displaced from the building because, you know, there's a fire here and we have to evacuate it, or whether there's a really nasty snowstorm and we can't get here. Now, instead of thinking we have to go to some other kind of physical space, now we have that, the advantage of working from home or from some other location remotely, which makes things much easier. So, like I said, things have really changed on the continuity front after COVID. And it's expanded our capability to deal with things and come up with mitigation measures that are a little bit easier to enact. So why is it so important? I mean, it's pretty straightforward if we think about it. I mean, we all live here in Maine or worked here in Maine before and greater New England and know that, you know, regular days can turn into nasty days and real quick. And that's why I like to use these couple sets of pictures. You know, on the left there, you see a regular day, beautiful view of the mountains off of Portland. And then, you know, what happens like it did 2 or 3 weeks ago, like we were talking about, several folks were talking about when we opened the meeting. So continuity is important because there's always going to be the chance out there that we can have a disruptive event that's going to not allow us to serve our constituents, you know, to provide those essential functions or deliver those services that so many people rely on us for. So it's just thinking about, again, like I opened with, the what ifs. You know, what if this happened? What if the office was closed? Or what if I couldn't get out of my house for some reason? Or what if I didn't have access to the internet in this location? What would I do to still perform my functions to serve those that need me? So I'll pause there right now. And just a heads up, guys, I can't, because I'm working off one screen, I can't really see everybody. So you have to either chime in on the chat so Bill can let me know or pop your camera on. But does anybody have any questions as of now? All right, hearing none, I'm going to keep going. All right, so when we're talking about continuity, like I said, if you really bring it down to its simplest form, how can we continue to function in the face of adversity is the easiest way to term that. And so the first thing I always tell anybody that's new to the continuity planning concepts is don't overthink it. Keep it simple if you can. Now, the other big piece of advice I always give folks is continuity planning is certainly a team effort. You know, think about your day-to-day operations in your organization. Most certainly, a lot of that relies on teamwork, and continuity planning is no different. I mean, I'm an advocate, and I'm in the camp of any planning effort is certainly a team effort, and continuity is no different. But think about what you need to do to keep your organization's functions moving. That's certainly going to be a team effort when you have, like you see there, a bunch of different subject matter experts across your organization. They're going to help you gather that data and start drafting the information you need. And I'll cover this a little more in depth in a minute. It'll make a little more sense, but you're going to need to rely on your partners and your coworkers to provide some of the information you're going to need to actually develop your plan. Another key aspect is if you're not in the leadership of your organization, you're going to need the buy-in from your organizational leadership for continuity planning. That's a really key element. So not only, in signing the plan itself or promulgating a plan itself, but through that planning process, get their buy-in, get them on board for thinking about things from this perspective, planning for the what if. And anytime you have that organizational leadership buy-in, your efforts are going to be that much easier to accomplish and obviously relevant as well. So one thing I want to point out too is in my world, in the planning world, there certainly are, different levels of plans. You have strategic planning, and you have operational planning and tactical planning, and then you have policies and procedures and standard operating procedures like you see written there. Think about what plans do versus policies or procedures, excuse me. So think of your plan as like the overarching framework. It kind of sets your posture as to what you want to do. On the higher level, if we're not able to go into the office, we want to do this, or if this much staff is missing, we're going to change our operations to meet that need to do that. It's really the overarching principles of what you're going to do in those situations. And then SOPs or similar procedures are going to give you like the details. They're going to tell you the detailed step-by-step actions you need to take when those situations happen. So again, think of that framework as the large overarching structure of what you want to do. And those more intricate SOPs or other procedures, policies will help support those plans by being a little more granular in detail. Any questions on that? All right, hearing none, I'm gonna jump into a few what we call continuity planning elements. And again, if you're not super familiar with continuity, some of these might seem a little daunting or very, very unfamiliar. I'm not going to go into super detail on each one of these right now. I'll give a brief description, but when you see them all listed out like this and get a little more context as to what each thing is, it really makes sense. And what I want you to think about, what you see listed here, those different bullet points there, if you will, is think about like a roadmap. So the first thing we talked about was thinking about your essential functions, and what those essential functions are, again, is basically what your organization needs to do to accomplish its mission. And so first of all, you got to identify what those are in order to understand what you need to keep doing. And the rest of the things that you see there listed below those identification of essential functions really have a lot to do with plan development and developing mitigation measures. So think of things like alternate facilities or alternate working arrangements, i.e. like telework or remote work. Think about if a circumstance happens in a disruption to your normal business operations, what about communications? So not only internally to your staff, but also to the partners that you work with day in and day out. Don't you think it'd be really important if you picked up and moved your operations completely out of one location to another, or the entire office was remotely working or something like that? You'd want to make sure you communicate that externally as well as internally with your staff. I mentioned this briefly before, essential records. Think about if you're displaced from your normal day-to-day operating environment, you're going to have some kind of records that you're going to need to access. And when we say essential records, it really depends on your organization, but it could be anything from payroll records to contracts or MOUs, or like in my world, like our state's comprehensive plan or our organizational continuity plan. Things that are essential, and it's inherent in the name, right? Essential to your day-to-day operations, and that you want to have access to. Another thing we want to consider is our human resources, our staff, and managing those folks as well. So Bill spoke to a very important point. Think about family care plans. Managing our internal resources from the human perspective. We want to make sure everybody's safe, everybody's comfortable, that everybody's got good communication, and that especially that when things are squared away at home, much to Bill's point, then we can concentrate on the task at hand. So that's what we mean by human resource management and capital management, human capital management, excuse me. But then the last few things you see listed there, just like any other plan, you want to You want to work on your, what I would call your preparedness side of the house. So you're planning for testing, training, and exercising your continuity plan. And then the last couple of things you see listed there, devolution. That's a concept you want to think about. Say you're an organization within the community. You know what your mission is, the services you provide to the community members. Maybe one of your mitigation measures is to pass that responsibility off to someone else. That's really what devolution is. Think about as passing off your responsibilities for those missions that you, or essential functions rather. Sometimes you hear the term mission essential functions, just so you're aware that that maybe you don't have the ability to do within your organization, but through pre-planning and agreements pre-disaster, you have the ability to pass those responsibilities off to someone else. And I'll give you a good example here, like at MEMA, where we have a business office and finance office, right? If for some reason our normal day-to-day operations were disrupted and our business office wasn't able to continue to process payments for some reason, we might have a strategy in place to devolve that to the service center here or something like that. So just think about devolution as passing off those responsibilities for a temporary period of time until you're able to return to your normal operations and resume those functions. And then lastly, reconstitution. Think about that as recovery. Reconstituting means you're ceasing your continuity of operations, you're enacting your continuity plan, and you're resuming normal functions. So it's just, think about reconstitution as recovery and returning to normal operations. So again, guys, I know there's a lot here. There's a lot of details when it comes to continuity planning, and I'm trying to not go too far in the weeds, but provide that good context at the same time. So please jump in at any time if you have any questions. So I mentioned this before, but maybe seeing it on here might help you a little bit. So, think of those essential functions, of those things that can't be postponed even in the face of adversity, during a disaster. So things that are directly related to the mission of your agency or organization, and that can be through a myriad of things. For us, I think of like statutory obligations and requirements. We're required by law to provide some services. But also, at the community level, oftentimes think about life safety operations or sustaining, an economic base or an industrial base. Whatever organization you are, you're gonna have certain things that you're obligated to do. And again, whether that's by law, like some of ours are, or just through your different mission statements and your different obligations to your communities, think about those things that no matter what happens, you don't want to stop providing those services. That's your essential function. And then again, that's your basis for what your continuity plan is going to do. It all revolves around being able to continue to do those essential functions. And one thing you'll end up doing through your planning process is identifying essential supporting activities. And just like you see there, they allow the function and mission to continue, but they aren't necessarily an output like your essential function would be. So like what you see listed here, like payroll and accounting, people in an organization, they like to get paid. They're probably not going to keep coming to work if they're not getting paid. So even though that may be a bad example for some organizations, because that you may identify that as an essential function, right? But in some instances, that may just be an essential supporting activity. So it allows that staff to continue to be coming in and providing those essential services. So there's a few different ways that you can identify those essential functions, and there's a few different processes you'll see listed there on the left-hand side under determining essential, and those EFs just means essential functions. You want to identify all those, what you think may be essential, and then run what's called a business process analysis and a business impact analysis. And I'll outline these here in just a second, but what those are just processes that help you determine the priority for those functions and if they are indeed essential, and then all the kind of tertiary and secondary things that go with those. Think about things like what records are important for those positions, what equipment's needed or what services are needed to make that, what are the essential supporting activities. And basically what that does is those processes allow you to determine what functions are critical, and again, maybe labeled as essential, and your ability to prioritize those. What you're going to do as part of that planning process is present recommendations for leadership to review what you think are priorities. And so that's going back to my previous point of getting that buy-in from your leadership. It is a very important part of the planning process for continuity, because you're going to be relying on them to really be the final say, if you will, if that makes sense, of what the prioritization is of these functions should, again, because the whole idea of prioritizing them is giving them priority. So if something does happen, you have a list of you can kind of go down and say, hey, look, this is the first thing we need to make sure that we're getting back online, or it doesn't go offline, or we need to return to normalcy as much as possible, as soon as possible. And a lot of that has to do with the things that you see on the right-hand side. So once we've identified that essential function, what do we need to be able to perform that? Obviously, staff is pretty important, like I said before, but in your planning process, you don't want to identify critical staff by name. You want to identify it by position whenever possible. Because think about, if you go through this long planning process, and it doesn't have to be long, I guess, but oftentimes it is, because I mean, I think you can see here continuity can be pretty intricate, is that you want to create a little less work for yourself, because if you got critical staff listed out by personnel, not by position, anytime you have any change in personnel, you're gonna have to go in and revise that plan. So as kind of a planning, part that we always do in most of our plans is we try to list things by position. But also many things that I mentioned before, you want to identify, and a lot of it will be done through those processes that I talked about before, that BPA and BIA, those critical systems you may need to access. What interdependencies does that function have? What's the impact of using an alternate facility? Do we need to think about orders of succession for the organization? So again, if a member of your leadership is unavailable, do you have plans in place to have someone step up and fill in for them? And what authorities have they been given that succession? And then any of those other essential records or other pertinent documents you see may be needed to continue that function. These are all things that you want to get out in the air, if you will, through your planning process, and then you can start to put things together. And a lot of times what you'll see is what I often, and what I've done in our organizational planning process, is make them into tables, matrices, whatever you want to call them. Here's an essential function. Here's the staff that help make that happen. Here are some of the interdependencies that function has. Here are some critical systems and documents that are needed to make that happen. And if something was to happen to leadership, maybe who's gonna fill in the shoes for that position, if that makes sense. Any questions on that? All right. So I'll touch real lightly on the BPAs and BIAs, because these are really the integral part of the planning process for continuity. So you see there, you do the business process analysis first, and think of this as like writing your job description, if that makes sense. So there's all kinds of templates and processes you can follow, but think about this: what you'll have at the end of this business process analysis is a roadmap for whatever that function is. So I think, for an example, like going through the BPA process for my position here at MEMA, basically you can think of that, once I've completed that, someone can come behind me and take a look at that BPA result and pretty much have a roadmap for what to do in my position. So who do I talk to? What equipment do I need? All that good stuff. And like you see listed there, capturing those processes, workflows, expertise needed, resources, all that stuff will really provide you a good guideline for how to perform that function. And then the next step we take is the business impact analysis. And what you want to think of that is okay, I know what this function is. How's that going to be impacted by various different kinds of risks, hazards, or risks? Like I said, maybe a snowstorm, or evacuation of the building, or maybe a severe staffing shortage like we saw during COVID, right? There can be all kinds of things out there that could impact the organization's possible ability to perform that function or that mission. And really what your business impact analysis does is allows you to create mitigation measures to that. So A few of those things I listed out before, orders of succession or devolution. There's a bunch of different ways you can mitigate those impacts to your different operations as a business. And then really what you're looking for out of that business impact analysis is the foundation of evaluating and establishing those risk mitigation strategies. And so very similar to what I said before, you'll probably end up with some kind of table or a matrix that says, here's my function. This is the threat or hazard that it faces. What are my mitigation measures to combat that? That's really what you want to end up with. And that's really, if you think about it, the basis of your continuity plan. If this happens, this is what I'm going to do to be able to keep my essential functions or mission essential functions going. That's what I say. It's simplistic in concept, a little more nuanced and intricate in actual plan development, because you're looking at, if you have a small organization, it may be a little bit easier, but as the size of your organization grows, probably the number of essential functions that you have is going to grow as well. So you're looking at conducting a BPA and a BIA, these two analysis processes for every single function that you have. So if you could kind of get my drift here, as we're going through this process, I keep talking about matrices and tables. The more and more functions you have, the more and more data you're going to start to have. And it can become, it can grow pretty exponentially pretty quickly. And so just prepare yourself as you're going through this process to try to keep it as simple as possible, but effective as well. And I hope that makes sense, where you don't want to just, do it to do it and say you have a continuity plan. You want it to be relevant and usable, but also you don't want to go so far down in the weeds that you don't get your plan finished, because then that's kind of negating the whole process in general. And so I'll just talk, what I'm going to close out with today is just the 4 phases of continuity to wrap things up. So just like we like to do in the emergency management world, here's another graphic of a representation of some kind of phases or should I say some kind of process that's outlined in different phases that we can put a cool circle graphic on to represent that this is a constant, constantly developing and evolving situation. So this stuff's pretty straightforward. You got those 4 phases you see there: readiness and preparedness, your activation phase, your operations, and then your reconstitution. And you notice by the graphic there that, the threat or event, occurs in between your readiness and preparedness and your actual activation, which makes sense, right? You're in a steady state phase of readiness and preparedness. You've done your continuity planning, your test training and exercising it, doing the things that you need to do, and then boom, something happens that could disrupt your normal day-to-day operations. Well, that's when you're going to activate your continuity plan. And the rest will make sense here in just a second. So readiness and preparedness, really touched on this. It's your traditional preparedness things. Think about, like I said, test training and exercise, guidance to all staff, like you see at the bottom of that left-hand side. That's really important. That the planning process, yes, is very important, but also nesting that within all your staff and all of the plans that you have as an organization is just as important. Super, super important that all staff within your organization, no matter how big or small you are, understands why you go through the continuity planning process and then what to do in that process. And that's where your training and exercise comes in. Because really what you're doing is really trying to get the concept of those risk management and mitigation strategies ingrained in all your staff. And then, because when something happens, you want staff to be able to hit this activation phase seamlessly, right? So this is, the activation, pretty inherent in the name. This is when you actually activate your plan to be able to continue those essential functions. So you see some examples there. I've used a few of these before. Maybe there's a credible threat and we got to evacuate the building, or maybe there's some kind of internet outage at your office and you can't really do anything, so you got to go somewhere else. Those are all opportunities to activate your continuity plan, because again, you're just developing strategies to keep going, to keep doing those things that you need to do. And it's important to point out here, I think, as well, is that maybe your mitigation strategy is to halt some parts of your day-to-day operation and just concentrate on those few things that you need to do. And again, that all revolves back to, like I said before, identifying through those assessment processes, maybe some things you're obligated, like maybe by law or whatever it may be, to do. So don't think that you have to have a mitigation strategy for every single thing you do in your organization. It's really the takeaway from continuity planning is identifying the things that you have to keep doing no matter what. And maybe some of that is a little bit of thinking about maybe there's some things that we can stop for a little bit or put on pause to make sure we're doing these other things and then resume them as soon as possible. Because really, the other two phases are pretty straightforward as well. Operations. So that means you're actually enacting your mitigation measures that you've developed in your continuity strategy. So keep performing those essential functions. You want to make sure, pretty straightforward concepts as well. Make sure all personnel are accounted for. Communications have been established. Like I said, remember, if you're changing locations or there's a change up to your normal day-to-day operations, we want to make sure that we're communicating that both internally with all our staff and externally with our relevant partners. And then we want to continue to do that throughout the disruption until we get to reconstitution. And again, think about that reconstitution as recovery. The whole time we're in the operations phase, we're going to be monitoring the situation. And then once it's determined that the threat or hazard or whatever it may be is no longer there and we can return to normal operations, boom, we're going to go into reconstitution mode. And that involves things you see listed there. Making sure all personnel are once again accounted for. It's been communicated to them that we can now return to our normal working posture, verify that all those things you need in your original facility or wherever it may be is available for you to continue in a normal fashion, and that you have just as you have a priority based approach to identifying your essential functions, it's going to be the same thing to reconstitution. Maybe there are a couple things that it would be so much easier to do with your regular facility that you can get those staff back there that need to do that back there, and maybe everybody else is still working remote or at that alternate location. So there's no cut and dry here of where those limitations are and what the different strategies are. It all depends on your organization and what your needs are and what the situations are that you'll face. But really, again, think about that there's a deliberate process throughout all of these. You want to make sure, I hope you're picking up some themes here throughout this process, whether it's planning or actual activation of the continuity plan or reconstitution of continuity of operations, is that communication is key as well. Not only internally, but remember externally as well. So this is what I'll close with before I open it up for questions. A bunch of great resources here. I'll make sure to send this. Actually, Bill already has this presentation, but I'll make sure it's available for anybody that wants it. He can shoot it out via email. But there's some really good resources here. There's the continuity guidance circular that you see there. That's a FEMA product that the last one they put out is in 2018. That's if you're wondering a little bit more about continuity and all the stuff I've been blabbering about here for the last half hour or so, that's a really good place to start. It's a really good foundational document that explains a lot of the principles very well and can probably make things a little bit clearer than I have here in this short time. But then also, if you're actually going into the planning process, there's lots of other resources out there. And again, these are just a couple or a few, should I say, that are out there. Please don't hesitate to contact myself or the agency in general. We can get you linked up to some other stuff. So with that, obviously, thank you, number one. I appreciate it. As you can tell, I like continuity, and I've talked about continuity all the time. But I certainly want to open it up for any questions that I can answer right now.
Anybody have any questions for Jonathan?
Yeah, this is Phyllis, Jonathan. Thank you for the presentation. was wondering how does it seem feasible to actually exercise the plan? I guess it just seems like there's so much involved.
Yeah,
Do you-
yeah, no, yeah. I mean, I see what you're saying, Phyllis. Yeah, I mean, certainly there are some opportunities, and really, I'll take MEMA for an example. We exercise this plan on a weekly basis because we have, I mean, I would say the vast majority of our staff telework at least 1 or 2 days a week. So really, we're continuing our day-to-day operations not in our office. You may not think of it that way, but that's actually you're exercising some of your continuity capabilities. If you think about before COVID, like I was mentioning, we teleworked 1 day a week, maybe, if at all. It was a little more limited, but we were actually still testing it at that time. It's when you think about picking up everything from, like, say, your normal office and moving to another alternate physical location, setting stuff up there, and I'm guessing, Phyllis, you're coming from the perspective of, do we want to stop some of our non-essential day-to-day operations just to test this? Is that kind of where you're coming from?
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
because I like exercising plans because you can see where the holes are.
Right.
But like for the utility I work for, I'm just thinking of, these huge SOPs and all this stuff, and grabbing all that stuff just seems,
A lot.
yeah, it seems like a lot. So I guess what we could do is just exercise segments of the plan instead of the whole thing all at once.
Yeah, I mean, there's a myriad of approaches you could take, Phyllis, but I would certainly recommend limiting the number of physical documents that you need to, like, pick up and move, if that makes sense. Whether it's scanning them and storing them somewhere electronically that you can have remote access to. But yeah, it's certainly exercising your continuity plan, especially in an organization like yours, could definitely prove challenging. You just got to come up with some kind of unique ways and strategize how you can, and maybe it is segmented, like you're saying.
Yeah, I think that talking out loud about it now, I think that would be more palatable. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anybody else? Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for the excellent presentation. As Jonathan mentioned, he's accessible and available. He can troubleshoot and help you with your planning efforts. And again, as I shared earlier, is if we take care of things at home, we're able to serve our communities a lot more effectively. And again, there's no perfect plan, but the idea of having a plan is critical. And I think the idea, even what Phyllis had brought up, even to be able to take components of it, maybe it's relocating or going virtual, things like that, just understanding the system so people know, yeah, things may go bad, but you can overcome some of those adversities by some proper planning. So with that, I do thank Jonathan. I thank everyone here for your participation in the work that you're doing. And again, feel free to reach out. We look forward to seeing you next month at 211 Maine presentation on the third Tuesday. And again, we have more coming in the future. So again, thank you everyone for your time today.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Yes, thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.